We've had this program set up for quite a while, and it's interesting with the timing of it post-election. I don't know how many of you read poetry or care anything about poetry. I'm not going to cram it down your neck. What I would like to do is take you through the history of protest poetry, 3,000 years of protest poetry. We'll probably clear out around midnight. It's going to go pretty quickly. And what I would like you to take away with it is just kind of the sense of, while we are doing what we're doing with FIG and ProPublica and NARAL and ACLU and all those organizations are going about doing what they're doing, and we're writing our congresspeople and our senators, poets are out there working too, and they've been doing it for a long, long time. And things are now, of course, heating up. Just this morning, I pulled off my email. There's a publisher in New York, Black Lawrence Press. They do mostly poetry, some fiction. Anyway, and they're now, it's Christmas, getting ready for holiday shopping, so they're offering all their books, which they've done hundreds of over the years. If you buy a book, they'll donate $1 to the ACLU for every book you buy. So things like this are starting to happen. Then I get farther into the news, and I find out that last night was the National Book Awards. And my little notice in my email box said, this is from the New York Times, politics intruded on this year's award ceremony, where Mr. Whitehead, he's the fellow who won the fiction award, whose novel explores the horrors of American slavery, urged writers to fight the power. So here you've got a national, very prestigious organization giving an award to, among its many awards, its biggest award to a black author on a book, The Underground Railroad, a novel, that discusses the horrors of slavery. And he had a very moving speech, and you can find these things on YouTube. And then they also give an award to organizations that foster younger writers. And one such organization fosters a community of black poets, and they've been instrumental over the years in creating opportunities for black poets to be heard. So Coven won this award, and one of the biggest black poets in the United States, Terrence Hayes, gave the award, saying, it's such a futuristic idea, a world in which descendants of slaves become poets. So the National Book Award folks are in with us too, supporting us. So we're going to spend 20 minutes or so very quickly moving through time. This is my heritage as a poet. When I write protest poetry, I do a lot of environmental advocacy, and certainly I was very much instrumental, involved in the Occupy movement. Anyway, so poetry of protest, protesting something, advocacy, advocating something. I brought a new issue of a journal who just did a complete issue on advocating for legalized marijuana. So you never know, advocating and witnessing. I saw this. I saw the Muslim woman be harassed. I tried to stop it. And then you go home and you write a poem about it and you share it with others. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So as long as there's been poetry, there's been protest poetry. I like to think of the petroglyphs as that as well. So we're going to give you a short history all the way through from the Greeks to present day, and look at some of the things that are going on today that are supporting all our efforts, that are going to help us get through the next 2-4 years. The point is, you're not alone. There's an army of poets out there, and other writers too, who believe in free inquiry. So just an idea of how we communicate. It's not just in books or in magazines, but we take to the streets as well. So it got started back with the Greeks, wouldn't you know? Plato said, "Mariner, do not ask whose tune this may be, but go with good fortune. I wish you a kinder sea." And what he's saying is, war is awful. I want you to live in a world that doesn't have war, a world where there's a kinder sea. So even on tombstones, they were starting way back then to put messages anti-war messages. Another one from Simonides, a lyric poet, talking about the dead. Have you heard? Do you understand? In other words, he's asking us from way back then, do we understand what happens with war, what the price is, what can we do about it? And there are hundreds of these in the history of the ancient Greeks. And then one of the most seminal events in protest poetry was Sappho, a Greek lyric poet who became an advocate for make love, not war. One of her fragments, that's all we have of her poems, are little pieces of text that managed to survive. And she was the one who came up, in Greek of course, with make love, not war. And she promoted the joys of lesbian love. So she was an advocate for lesbian love. And the word lesbian, as we use it in English, came from the island on which she was born, Lesbos, in the Aegean Sea. Pick up your lyre and sing to us of her who wears violets on her breasts. Sing especially of hers who's wandering. So she lost her lover, she misses her, and she's remembering the violets on her breast. Jumping a few years, the Anglo-Saxon era, this was an incredible find from the 10th century, where one of the main focuses is what happens to women during war. Who are the women? We're left behind, or we've lost husbands, we've lost sons, and it really is a strong advocacy for women's rights and the cost of war to women, kidnapped, raped, impregnated. Think of the Viking invasion of England. Then a few years later, 16th century, there were this phenomenon of broadsides. You could print and you could hand out cheap copies of information. So it started as advertisements, news, proclamations, words to spread the news of what's going on in government, and then also protest ballots. So all different kinds of issues. A labor meeting, treason. This is the one over on the corner. That's a long poem, a ballad that was circulated back in the 16th century. And most of you probably heard of Robert Burns. We certainly know Auld Lang Syne, which he wrote. And he was an incredibly progressive Scottish writer who promoted Scottish nationalism. He's been called upon recently when they had the separation vote in Scotland. Everybody was quoting Burns and carrying Burns around and citing him as, it's a part of our heritage. Robbie Burns said so. We shouldn't be part of England. And he got into, just the whole business. What is this politics stuff anyway? Maybe it's better to be deaf and blind to it. He lamented the whole slavery movement and the cost to those human beings. William Blake, we often think certainly was big in the Church of England. But he had a real mystical strain to him. And he really thought that our imagination was where God was. So it wasn't all up here. It wasn't the great He. It's our imagination, which is pretty interesting for that era, that he's thinking ahead. And he also was very active in anti-racism and anti-slavery movement. He wrote a poem about the little black boy who was hanged, and found great sympathy with that young man. Percy Shelley, he is probably one of the biggest atheist heroes among poets. He was jailed for it. And it's interesting, they just found some more papers of Shelley's, and the people who are guarding his estate aren't releasing them. And the historians of Shelley think that it's because there's quite a bit of atheism in that material, and they don't want to tarnish his romantic reputation. I return to nature. In other words, his molecules are just going to be down in the ground, or flying around in the air. Yeah, So from one of his most famous poems, Ode to the West Wind, he's a scatter as from an extinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind, be through my lips to unawakened earth. So he's planning his funeral. He wants to be returned to the earth, ashes and sparks. And he wants you to remember his words, not his body. Oscar Wilde, most of us have heard of him and seen his plays, The Importance of Being Earnest, probably the most popular. And he was imprisoned in London for a couple of years for homosexuality. And it was hard labor. This is an author, not used to that kind of stuff. But while he was there, he used his time in prison, besides making little ones out of big ones, writing about witnessing his jail environment, the people, getting to know the people who were incarcerated with him, and he wrote this incredible ballad of Reading Jail, and it's extremely long, 109 stanzas, always follows the same pattern in terms of rhymes and the number of syllables in each line. It's really something to read, but it covers all the issues that he was digging up while being imprisoned, and how that whole incarceration thing works or doesn't work. So here's one, and he included in it what he wanted his epitaph to be. Alien tears will fill for him pity's long broken urn, for his mourners will be outcast men, and outcasts always mourned. So in the end, he didn't think it was going to get better. Now we can look back and say, Oscar, it is getting better, despite what happened in the United States this week. Walt Whitman, a lot of us poets call him St. Walt. He was a very loud, outspoken religious skeptic. He was anti-slavery, even though he served in the Civil War as a medic. He saw the horrors of the war. And he was homosexual. And he tried through his poetry to reach everyday people. And that's probably why most people know about him, or parts of his Leaves of Grass. But he really celebrated all of us in all our diversity through that epic collection of poems. Have you learned the lessons only of those who admired you and were tender with you and stood aside for you? Have you not learned great lessons from those who braced themselves against you and disputed passage with you? In other words, have discussions, talk to each other, learn what each person is about. And he's had, I mean, he's quoted all over the place. I love that, resist much, obey little. I'm always resisting. I am large, I contain multitudes. He felt he had America inside of him. Peace is always beautiful. Marvelous player. I threw this guy in, although I'm kind of focusing on British and American. Jose Marti, hero and poet, he was instrumental in bringing Cuba freedom, independence from the Spanish. And here's his hero. I mean, there's statues of him all over Cuba, right? Guy. Yeah. And but he was a poet. That was his real job, and he ended up making a revolution happen. And one of the ways he did it was he spent a lot of time in Florida. He was exiled for a long time, spent some time in Europe, in Spain, and then came to the U.S. and worked for union rights for workers with fellow Cubans who settled in Florida, whether up near Tampa and Ybor City or down in Key West, yeah. And he's, this is his most famous collection, now available in English and Spanish. And he really had hopes to better society. And you'll see this, he cultivates a white rose. That's his symbol. Poets speak in symbol, and that's his symbol for hope, for what we can do with our lives, and better society. Probably his cousin, Garcia Lorca, Spanish poet during the Spanish Civil War. He was gay. He spoke up. They shot and killed him. Books banned. His books were banned for quite a long time. Very much outspoken about tyranny. I mean, he was seeing it around him day in and day out with the war in Spain. Some pretty dark pictures, and facing up to the darkness. Never has been, amid suicides, hysterias, groups of fainting people, have I felt the sensation of real death without hope. I mean, he got pretty down, and we still read him partly because of that darkness, to witness the darkness. Wilfred Owen, one of our own, he brought the horrors of World War I home to the U.S. Probably the leading poet of World War I, where he really showed us what happened in the trenches in World War I. His most famous poet, again, written from the trenches, drink with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstrip that drop behind. Gas, gas, quick boys. So he painted pictures with his words of what was going on. Not me, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. I mean, you can't get much more graphic than that unless you watch a movie. Wallace Stevens, where's George? George's hero. He was an agnostic and later then became flat out atheist, and we remember him, not just poets, but philosophers, for his notion of the supreme fiction. God isn't up there. I mean, here we are, back to this theme. Not so much in the imagination, but it's a human creation. We created God. And that is our supreme fiction, and we just have to recognize it's a fiction. Notions of religion no longer suffice. So he came up with this, handy term, supreme fiction, that harkening back to Blake, that we invented him. He grew out of our imagination, or she. And I just threw in a couple of my favorite quotes. I'm the angel of reality, seen for a moment, standing in the door. I'm the necessary angel of earth, since in my sight you see the earth again. So we don't go off to heaven. We go off to the earth. We die. E.E. Cummings, I throw him in. Everybody just about knows E.E. Cummings. He was not a nice man. Very bohemian, but he also got really wrapped up as a McCarthyite. So he's not the greatest representative, but he did write one of the landmark poems against bullying, which we could certainly, you read his words again. Langston Hughes, one of the greatest black poets, grew out of the Harlem Renaissance, was very active, not just writing poetry, but again, on the streets, in the ghettos, working to bring hope to his people. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. And I think those words are particularly moving at this time in our lives. You know, continue to have our dreams, because we don't want to end up like broken birds. Allen Ginsberg, quite famous, gay, practicing Buddhist, even though he was born a Jew. He was certainly central to what they called the Beat Generation in the 60s, a lifelong protester. So not just scribbling in his notebooks, but out on the streets protesting. And there is going to be some, coming up, some R-rated material after this slide, if you want to close your eyes. And he's a great. His book, How, was embargoed, couldn't sell it, taken it off the shelves, embargoed for obscenity. But the judge says, no, that's not obscene. It's of redeeming social value. So how can it be obscene? So it went back on the shelves. And all of us read it. And there's coming up as a line from Hal, so beware. I won't read it aloud. So, ow was right. Adrienne Rich, one of the most prominent feminist poets of the 20th century. She died just a few years ago. Wonderful, wonderful poet. Highly influential. She's got a whole, legion of poets who grew out of the Adrienne Rich tradition, not just lesbians, but feminist poets. She dealt a lot with the issue of power. What is, especially being a woman, especially being a lesbian woman, how do we take power? How do we gain power? How do we keep it? Gary Snyder, another Buddhist, kind of the father of eco-poetry, came out of the tail end of the Beat Generation. We call him the poet laureate of deep ecology. Pulitzer Prize, American Book Award. He is a great, great man. And he is still alive, bless his heart. I finally got to meet him a few years ago and thank him for his inspiration. Another fellow, Sam Hamill, same era as Gary Snyder, much more focused on anti-war movement. He was, by the way, invited to the White House by Laura Bush, and he refused the invitation because he didn't want to be a party of the Bush administration. And as it turned out, when Sam said no, others said no, and the event never took place. Yeah. And he just wrote on his Facebook page, you can follow him if you're interested. I mean, he tells it like it is. He stands now, he has a mortal disease. He's in his last stages, and now he's going to lose his health care. And he just put out a plea if anybody can help. When Obamacare goes away.
He's got Medicare.
He's over 65.
Oh, yeah, yes. And he's on Medicaid. Well, he gets Medicare, but then he has supplements. Yeah,
Republicans.
Yeah, poets are not rich people. William Hayden, one of my best friends, my mentor, wanted perhaps the greatest modern poet of advocacy. One of the reasons I say that is because of the breadth of his work. Holocaust, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a new one out. 6 books about the Holocaust. 3 on the environment. What we stand to lose in nature. Anti-war poems. This is the Ribbons from the Gulf War. That was the first Gulf War. Hiroshima Suites and Poetics of Hiroshima, looking at another Holocaust. The Native American Holocaust, 2 beautiful books, wonderful books on the Native American situation. And I had the honor of reviewing one of those books for the journal I write for, the Centrifugal Eye. He's covered the ground. Football corporations has to do with the takeover of athletics by big corporations. Very sarcastic. Some of them are just, I mean, you laugh out loud and you cringe at the same time. And then he did one about being gay in America. In fact, anthologies, and I brought a few that are sitting out on the piano. I Googled them, protest anthologies by poets. 3 million, over 3 million clicks on Google. And that's just for starters. It is a big, big deal now. And you get a lot of poets together, a lot of voices, and all their friends buy the book, and their family buys the book, and it just keeps rippling out. So they tend to make money for publishers while raising awareness of what's going on. Here are 2 anti-fracking. I was in both of them, by nature thrust coming to the fore. Roger and I edited an anthology on species diversity, what we stand to lose in North America. I was fortunate to, Bill McKibben agreed to write the foreword. He's the fellow who you hear a lot on NPR and other places. He founded 350.org. So he's very much at the head of what's happening, anti-pipeline work and whatnot. There's a very radical group of poets who think of themselves as eco-warriors. And they have done sabotage. There's no compromise for poetry, and I know some are up at Standing Rock right now.
It seems every month anthologies of social justice hit the shelves, whether it's the American Civil Rights Movement or today's Black experiences told by African American poets, Latino social justice, and going back to earlier times, anti-apartheid poems. More anthologies, the anti-war, Vietnam anti-war, Iraq anti-war, period. And of course, feminism, all over the place. I'll cite a few here. Homegirls, a Black feminist anthology. Her Words, another anthology about Black women's experience. Words of Fire, and Sisterhood, yet another one. And turning from feminism to other gender issues, there are LGBT anthologies being published by local groups nationwide, as well as internationally. It doesn't end.
Publishing an anthology of gay poetry. We have Hope for America. Writers respond after 9/11. The Occupy movements anthology that I edited with an activist friend of mine. There are journals, regular journals of environmental justice and advocacy. New Verse News, is they publish something every day, very politically progressive, always topical, because they're publishing something every single day. And lately you've been getting 2 or 3 every single day. This goes back to April. So they've been following Trump since April, if not before. And they always pair the poem with a visual, which is kind of nice. I mentioned this is our local gay community. That's their annual anthology. That happens to be one of my poems. I'm not going to take the time to read it. This fellow, you wouldn't know it because it's not in motion, but we have all kinds of poetry readings. So we're out talking to the community as well as, in our little ivory towers writing away. This fellow, John Swayze, is a gay deaf poet. So there's a whole community of deaf poets. Huh? No, it's not. This is just harkening back to the Occupy movement. We can use that again. Poetry events worldwide. 100,000 Poets for Change events are happening around the world all the time. And they're coordinated through 100,000 Poets for Change. And I'm going to wrap up with this one quotation. Thank you, George, for sending me. This was part of a clip from The Nation magazine, where Toni Morrison, both a fiction writer and a poet, said, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal." So that's what I've been doing. Questions, anybody?
How come you didn't include Woody Guthrie?
I didn't include any of the music poets.
If you take that out, no, he's a poet.
Yeah. Well, you could think Woody Guthrie, Dylan, and of course the love of my life after Roger, Leonard Cohen as well.
But there's like the kind of the source.
Yes. Certainly Pete Seeger's inspiration.
No, just looking, I would include it.
Okay. Maybe I'll do a little subset of protest poets, singers.
Certainly Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Hmm?
There was also Joe Hill.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, labor movement.
I think Ginsberg,
We could use that again.
Ginsberg was a singer in a sense, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Wasn't it
Yeah.
like song?
Yeah, and he would bring,
The harmonium.
yes,
You played
harmoniums, and he had another,
But
it
it's-
will almost look like a chauffeur, the horn they blow in synagogue,
Yeah.
that he played when
Mostly
he
the harmonium.
talked. Yeah.
But what was interesting to me was that, because I was very involved at that period of time in the 60s, nobody reads beat poetry anymore. And it's kind of, if I read them now, it's kind of past somehow or other. Is that they almost have to be in a period
That's because you grew up.
to appreciate it, to look back. And if I read the poetry, I think most of it's stuff. Nothing poetry. Most of it's stuff.
Poetry is an incredibly subjective thing.
Yeah,
It's heavy, it's,
Yeah.
Where you are in your life has that particular meaning.
They're having a renaissance on American campuses now in master's degree programs for creative writing. The beats are back big time. Don't ask, maybe it's the time, maybe it's the era, the tenor of the
Because
times.
marijuana's legal.
Some places, from Canada, yes.
Oh, the other poet you might have missed was Kumiyanka.
Yes, Kubiaka.
He wrote about Afro-American, wrote about, his main poem was, biggest poem was about, the poem was about the Vietnam War.
He's an incredible presenter and speaker too. When he delivers his poems, he's unbelievable. He chills. So he's another one. I mean, I could, like I said, I could be here till midnight easily, and we could include the singers, poets, and I mean, I can think of a dozen just feminist poets I would like to have in. I picked the big names because that tend to, you know, you see them in headlines sometimes. Their obituary. I've never seen the New York Times do a
But I think
big-
Gary Snyder is deceased.
Yeah, he's still alive.
No, I know.
Yeah, he is. He's still alive, and Sam Hamill's still alive. I think they're,
Fernie Dix.
No,
I don't know, I thought so. He brought out a new book last year. So I think he may still be alive, because the book came out last year.
The bookstore's still open,
Yeah,
still,
yeah, it's still a mecca.
gotta stick up for those independent bookstores.
That's right, you would know.
Could you read one of your own protest poems,
Yes.
please?
Yeah.
I want to hear your soul.
Oh, well, I'm trying to leave people with a little, okay, and, you know, bring this. This is the poem of the journal. They do a theme every quarter, and this was their marijuana issue, do be or not to be. Marvelous editor, I love this. No, I can read. And this is my representation. And at the top of every page, the little graphic is a burning roach. Anyway, it's called In the Campground Alone. A Florida moth seeks my lamplight, flapping, Mothra-ish against tense nylon dome, tapping. A few feet away, a feral hog abruptly grunts. The beast who stomps, snaps forest debris, cracks desiccated palm fronds, hoofed, tusked peril loiters, snorting until alligators scooted, fanged brow, hungering to mate, and I imagine T-Rex's breath. The dream comes from watching Jurassic World ganjed. I hear the monsters chewing. little paranoia creeping out.
Well, that's pretty good, especially for Florida.
Yeah, well, I wrote it in the campground over.
Perfect. Correction?
No, over at Caloosahatchee Regional, river from my little safari place.
Where would Maya Angelou fit in? She's got some, you know, fairness.
Yes, feminist poems, certainly the Black experience. Maya Angelou is the greats of female Blacks. Maya Angelou, Rita Dove, Lucille, yes, Nikki Giovanni, Lucille Clifton.
Norzio Person.
Yes, probably the beginning, one of the beginnings. The first woman ever published in the United States was a Black slave, Phyllis Wheatley. And she had someone who she was bought and brought into a progressive household. Yeah, they had a slave. And she was the house slave, and they educated her and taught her, and she learned Latin, and she would read some of her poems in little groups at the house where she lived when they had soiree kind of things. And an English publisher was very impressed with her, and he ended up publishing her. So she was the first woman in the United States to be published, and it was a slave. So interesting. So there's a whole spectrum to look into if you're interested in that. And you can start with Maya and look at Rita Dove's one of my favorites. And Lucille Clifton does a great one about her hips and being a Black woman with hips. Yeah, yeah. Big.
And we
It's
all
fun to
know
read.
hips don't lie.
No, there's no one. Anything else? Any other, who should I include? Anybody else?
Where are you based? Do you live here?
Roger and I live in North Fort Myers for 6 months, and then we're from Western New York, near Rochester.
Do you have some kind of institution here, or a bookstore, a group, or poetry?
No, there are a bunch of poets, but the Florida Poetry Society, we don't have a chapter here, oddly enough. A friend of mine said, why don't you start one? I said, no. At this age, I don't have the energy for that.
You have a coffee house where the beatniks hang out?
Well, there probably are. We hang out in bookstores a lot. You know, you can get a cup of coffee, sit, not those corporate ones, of course.
Do they have any poetry slams around here? Because I don't think
I have not seen much at all.
I haven't seen
I'm
it
sure
for a
they
while.
do at the university. I have some contacts at, Empire State, what used to be called Empire State.
Oh, Edison, what?
Edison.
FSW.
FSW.
Florida Southwest.
They do some things and they have classes. I've spoken in classes there, but I've not seen a lot of public readings. Sometimes a bookstore will do one, or sometimes larger condo communities will have authors. I've done that with a friend who's a novelist, and she and I have done a couple of big condo complexes down in Bonita Springs, and then she and I also did a program at an afternoon program at Cypress, the big swamp down south.
6 Miles.
No, not 6 Mile.
Oh, Clyde Butcher's place?
No, it's near there.
Corkscrew?
No.
Corkscrew Swamp?
I'm tired. I must be blanking out.
Grand Fella had
Kappa In Estella?
Did she hear you say corkscrew?
Out corkscrew. Thank you. I didn't hear it. Thank you. Yes, corkscrew. Duh.
Well, don't you think there'll be a lot of people locally now or nationally coming out with protests?
I think so.
Maybe we could pick some off of YouTube and play them one day. I'd like to hear them soon.
I know back in Rochester, there's a whole lot, there's all kinds, there's stuff going on all the time with protest poetry and marching and making poetry a part of the march. I know there are poets in New York City who are marching among all those
The
folks.
whole nation is
You know, when I always hear about all these protests and got to fight against all this kind of stuff, and I always think of that Mother Teresa quote, that when she was alive, she was always asked, how come you don't come to these anti-war protests and all? And she's like, you know what, I'm not going to fight against war, but invite me to a peace rally, and I'll be there. And so we could protest against Trump, and we can protest against everything, but why not
Advocate.
Why not advocate
Yeah.
for what we want?
Yeah.
What, energy flows where attention goes, right?
Right.
So give energy to the things that matter.
Witness
Right.
and advocacy, I think. I mean, I've been writing some protest poems because I have to get that venom out of
Yes.
Yeah.
my mind. So I've written
It's like a
some
devil.
really
You gotta go through 5
nasty,
stages of
nasty
grief
poems.
before I'm gonna
Yeah.
advocate.
I think
I
it's
just
an
want-
important process.
Yeah, let it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let it out.
accepting.
And the fracking, I mean, a lot of these are not just anti-fracking.
Fractal.
They're ways of advocating for the poor people whose lands are getting taken from them.
Right.
And the issues of social justice with these rowdies who come and work, like at the Bach and Shield up in North Dakota.
Dakota Pipeline, yeah, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and there's rape and murder. I mean, it's destroying communities. So there's a lot in here that's in favor of people taking responsibility or finding resources to help you. I mean, a lot of these people don't, like in Pennsylvania, one of the poets I work with my group, he's making the routes of all the Pennsylvania fracking fields and talking and interviewing people and then writing poetry. But they don't have an advocate there, like a lawyer or anything. So there's a lot of pro-advocacy. And,
Be the voice.
Be the voice
for
and
people who
witness.
don't have a voice, right?
and yeah, kick some butt if you want to too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Carla.
Very nice.
Thank you for coming tonight.